Welcome to Headlines. This is David Lichtenstein here in the Yeshiva Shalmaila, and this week's program, Webein HaMitzarim, will be about the Holocaust. Moshe famously said, my father actually asked him, he said, why don't we make a memorial day for the Holocaust? And Moshe said that in the Tainus of Tisha B'Av, and the day of Tisha B'Av, is commemorated and included all of the tragedies that happened to Klal Yisroel. And I would say that I'm being Meisef now, both on a klalistic level, to Knesset Yisroel, to Umas Yisroel, to Bais Yisroel, and I guess on some level, on a personal level. It commemorates our personal tragedies as well, on a family level, etc. So we went to a number of Rabbanim. Over the last generation, there have been many who have spoken about the Holocaust. We've had, from the Yeshiva world, we've had Rav Hutner wrote some and spoke very famously some about the Holocaust. From Rabbi Avigdor Miller, they just put out a book about the Holocaust. The Holy Ramash, the Chabadska, spoke about the Holocaust. The Satmar Rebbe spoke about the Holocaust. The modern Orthodox, Rabbi Ber Soloveitchik. So we figured, why not do a program on Tisha B'Av about how does the Maimon understand the Holocaust? We have Rabbi Yaakov Feitman, the Rav of Kehilas Yehuda, a very famous Rav, author, speaker, Talmid of Rav Hutner. He said he sat with Rav Hutner for 7 hours to write the speech about the Holocaust. We have the grandson of Rav Avigdor Miller and the Rav of his shul, Rebbe Elyahu Brog. We have the author from Chabad to tell us the Chabadska, what the Lubavitcher Rebbe said. We have the author of the Sichos Kodesh of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and the writer of Towards a Meaningful Life, Reb Simon Jacobson. From Satmar, we have Moshe Aryeh Kahane, Satmar Talmid. We have Moshe Taragin. He's Rosh Yeshiva in Gush, Etzyon. He will be telling us more for Rabbi Ber Soloveitchik, etc., how they look at it. Now we will have one survivor, Mrs. Epstein, a Holocaust survivor, talk about her experience. So this should be a very interesting program. Some of our upcoming programs are going to be being Jewish in the workplace. What does that mean? Eating in a non-kosher cafe, shaking hands with a woman, going to a holiday or other party after work, doing something unethical, but luckily allowed, but unethical because your boss requires it. Some more new upcoming programs. Are you responsible for your spouse's Yerei Shamayim? Your wife wants a hechsher you don't want, or she doesn't want to daven, or your husband doesn't want to get out of bed to go to minyan. How responsible are you for your spouse's Yerei Shamayim? We will have a program about girls' education. What do we look for it? Seminaries. Are they valuable? Are they just a shidduch tool? Are they just a way for many people in Israel to earn a very good living at their $20,000 or $30,000 fee? We will have a program about intimacy in halacha. Achasen and Kala teachers teaching it all wrong. And we will have a show on Ma'aseh Ksafim. Many shilas, contemporary shilas of Ma'aseh Ksafim, supporting your kids in Kollel, paying for their education after they're 6 years old. That many of the other contemporary shilas. We have some very interesting programs as well as some guest hosts coming up. Before we go, I would like to say a short thought on Tisha B'Av. Being that Tisha B'Av is the source of all our tragedies, or many of our tragedies, so here's a question. Moshe Rabbeinu says in the parsha that always precedes Tisha B'Av, Dvarim, Lo uchal levadi se'es eschem. I just can't do it. Lo uchal. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe Reya Mehemna saying this. Now here's what's amazing. The Meraglim said, V'yoimru loy nuchal lalois. We can't. And they're criticized, B'farshim, loy nuchal. How does a person say loy nuchal? Well, Moshe Rabbeinu says loy uchal also. Eicho esol levadi, he says loy uchal. And the chiluk seems to be very obvious. Here he says loy uchal levadi. Eicho esa levadi. I can't do it alone. Where is everybody else? Where are you? Why did you turn the other eye when you saw that person? You know that he's distressed. You know he's going through a hard time. Where are you? That's what he says. And when you think of it, what is one of the premier differences between man and animal? I once heard over from one of the, I think his name was Dusseldorf, or a Russian sociologist, an English sociologist. He said, a primary difference, one of the two differences between man and animal, he says, just imagine, he says, if a man and an animal were shipwrecked on an island, big giant island, the man is stuck. Imagine, Hashem, you were stuck on a big island. What are you going to do? You know how to plant food, you know how to, and even if you could, who's going to build your shelter while you're doing it? He says, but if you had a monkey with you, the monkey would jump into the trees, he would eat fruits, he would find nuts, he knows what's poisonous, what's not poisonous, he could sleep out in the cold. You go, animals sleep in the cold. He says the man would perish and the animal would live. So he says, then the question is, why do you own the zoos and the animals don't own the zoos if they're so much hardier? So he propositioned the following answer. He said, if you put 1,000 monkeys on the island and 1,000 humans, he says then the humans would win and the animals wouldn't. Why? One man would plant, one man would create the plow, one man would sharpen the blade, one man would do the mining for the metal, one man would be inventing a hose, a seed, etc. He said our ability to act as a community, what we call in Klal Yisrael, we call a tzibur, right? A poirish min a tzibur, minyan, knesses Yisrael, right? What does that mean? We can act together, whereas 1,000 monkeys on an island, I mean, there's really very little. There's some small family, on a family level cooperation, but after that, there's no ability to act in orchestra with each other. Look at society. When you sit down by a table, the table comes from one country, the wood is from another, the craftsmanship there, the steel from the screws from another. You cheer. Everything is all done through cooperation. So what does Moshe say? You know what the beginning of tragedy is? Lo yuchal levadi. What happened to our sense of community, our sense of village, our sense of responsibility, family? What happens to family when people cheat? It's not just cheating. It means we're uprooting, we're tearing up the fabric of society. And that's what when the famous Targum Unkla says, when he says, when Hashem creates Adam, what does he define Adam? Ruach memalala, a speaking man, the ability to communicate, the story of communication, of responsibility. When I went into, many, many years ago, I went into real estate alongside my learning, and I asked, I was in construction, I asked one of our contractors, I said, how many pounds does a 2x4 hold? He said, 600 pounds. I said, this building you're making, which was at that point was a 3-story house, I said, is all with 2x4s. How much does the roof weigh? He said, the roof, they have a slate roof they're putting on. It's going to be, 500 tons. I said, so how does a 600 pounds thing carry something 1,000 pounds? Its weight. He says, no. One 2x4 itself could carry 500 pounds. But when you truss it and you tie it together and you tie it into the infrastructure of the house, he says, then it can carry 1,000 times its weight, maybe 10,000 times its weight. So what does Moshe say? What's the source of tragedy is lavadi, badad, loneliness. It starts off the Medrash says with Eicha Esa Lavadi, and it ends with Eicha Yashva Badad. The beginning of all pain of destruction is when we stop speaking to each other. We stop looking the other way from each other. We don't communicate. We lose our sense of family, our sense of village. So what is a tikkun, possibly, of the sinas chinam that created this tragedy, the churban that we're in now for 2,000 years? Right? Is no more levadi. The answer to sinas chinam is ahavas chinam. We see somebody in pain, we pick up a phone, we reach out our arm, we take out our wallet, we open our house, we open our kitchen, our Shabbos table, we open our hearts. If we open up our hearts and it's no more levadi, loneliness isn't the saddest thing, the loneliness. We can be lonely as singles, we can be lonely married, we can be lonely in a room full of people. What does Moshe say? It's all about lavadi, eicha usa lavadi. If we can eliminate lavadi, we won't have any more eicha yashva badad. All hatred, war, strife, jealousy comes from badad, lavadi, no communication, no ahavas chinam. Let's be masakin this Tisha B'Av, the Churban, by saying I'm a kabel on myself the mitzvah of ahavas chinam, of ahavta l'reacha kamecha, behera yiban hamikdash. Let's go to our guests. Beforehand, our riddle. Everybody knows Erev Tisha B'Av. There's no mitzvah laharbis b'maychel. In fact, the Rambam in Hilchos Tainis in Perikei Alachates says, "Meyumeinu lo yachalnu be'erev Tisha B'Av tafshil afilu shel adashim." The Rambam says we don't make any celebration. There's no fancy meals erev Tisha B'Av, no big meals. He says anything. We didn't even eat a bean stew. He says only Shabbos is the exception. Right? Here's the Pella. Erev Yom Kippur, what's the halacha? Mitzvah lechol laharbis besuda Shulchan Aruch in the beginning of Taf Reish Tamid Alad, and it's a sugya rucha and yuma and Pei Aleph Amid Aleph. It says anisem es nafshei sechem. So the Mefarshim, many Mefarshim say, what's the reason? Right? The reason is they say time of the Kra because. And the lashon of the Taz is hechinu atzmechem for tomorrow. Prepare yourself for the veinisem of tomorrow by eating today. Right? The Rebbe Shalom was chas to fast a whole day. So he says, prepare yourself, Erev Yom Kippur. So the question is there's a din of preparation, Erev Yom Kippur, and we're marbe besuda. Why isn't there a din of preparation, Erev Tisha B'Av, not brought down not in the Shulchan Aruch, not in Shas, not in the Paiskim, that there's any mitzvah laharbis besud Erev Tisha B'Av. What's the difference? That's our riddle of the week. Let's go to our wonderful guests. We have the honor of having with us on the phone the Rav of Kehilas, Bais, Yehuda Tzvi in Cedarhurst. He's also a Talmid of the Yeshiva of Chaim Berlin, of Rav Hutner Zechron Levracha. He's a well-known writer for Mishpacha. He's written many books and Sfarim. He's written far back as the Jewish Observer. He's a Musmach of Reb Moshe, a Musramach of Rav Gifta, Rabbi Yaakov Feitman from the Five Towns. Welcome.
Shalom Aleichem, a pleasure.
Rav Feitman, you wrote an article in a sefer called The Path Through the Ashes of a speech that Rav Hutner Zechron Levracha gave at a convention of Menalim and Mechanchim, Aryeh, the Torah hashkafa towards the Holocaust. And I understand that you didn't just write it as one of the listeners, but Rav Hutner called you in, he was mamana you to write it, and he sat with you privately, read what you wrote, commented on it before it was published. Is that so?
Yeah, that's absolutely so. I would like to also give some credit to Rabbi Chaim Feitman Zatzal, who just recently passed away, who wrote the first draft. And then you're right, the Rosh Yeshiva called me in, and I'm both proud to say, but at the time it was incredible. I spent 7 hours with him writing it together.
So could you relate to us the question? What was his hashkafa? How could so many Erlicha, Kedoshim, 1.5 million children. What is hashkafa? How could that happen to us?
Right. So that's a very good question. His, in short, because it's quite a long, it was a long presentation and it's a long article, and the follow-up is long. So I'll give you the essence. The Yeshiva Zatzal was not happy with the terms Shoah and Holocaust because he felt that separates it from Jewish history. So he preferred, and he actually was the one that I think coined the term Churban Europa, and that was his term of choice, because it places that tremendous tragedy in the context of what he called Yiddish Yisurim, Jewish suffering. And what he explained was that periodically there's a thing that descends upon Klal Yisrael called the Teichacha. The first Teichacha, the second Teichacha is B'chutoisai Kisavai, or in this case he felt it was Nitzavim Vayelach, by the way. And there's no explaining any one aspect of Churban because the totality is what eventually, in the Jewish eschatology, the way that we look at the entire history of Am Yisrael, it includes both suffering, Golus, and Geula. That's the essence of the entire article.
And why does this occur? So it's part of, it's part of, in perspective, it's part of the whole mahalach of the Nitzlius of Klal Yisrael, but to somebody who lost siblings, parents, children. How do you explain it? Okay, so it's in the Teichacha and it happens, and therefore.
Right. So he explained as follows. It's interesting that after he spoke, there was widespread misunderstanding of one thing. People thought that he was saying that the Holocaust, let's just use the term for a moment because it's the most common term, the Holocaust happened because of various sins. There were Gedolim that said that, and in fact some of the Gedolim that you mentioned that I was close to held like that. Rav Hutner did not hold like that. He held that, I'll just say the Yiddish, Salit of Yiddish places. He said it's resting on Klal Yisrael's shoulders that this is how we get to the final denouement of and I think he even used the French term, to the final geula. So Galus includes suffering, but there's always a reason. So what is the reason? So he did declare, mostly at the second time that he spoke about this, what he called the Chazara Shir, that there had been a slow decline of Klal Yisrael from the time of the Haskalah, roughly a 200-year period, and one of the reasons that the Holocaust / Korban Europa came from Germany is because the Haskalah started in Germany. So when you talk about people that, and he was, by the way, very, very strong about not saying this to survivors necessarily. He told me that when I speak to an audience, if there are survivors there, don't talk about chas v'shalom tit for tat or even punishment. He didn't believe that this was a punishment. It was an einish. But it came to Klal Yisrael, like it says in the Torah, in the both Teichachas, but again, the pasuk in the Vayelech Teichacha goes like this: Hilcha Sheichei v'Mavisecha. Kodesh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu, "V'kama Am Hazeh v'Zon Acharei Eleinecha Aretz." This nation will fall into the lure of the Gentiles. V'Starti Panei Mehem. I will hide my face. So this is what many have written, that it was Hester Panim. The Holocaust was Hashem hiding his face. But now comes the part that almost nobody else said, to my knowledge. The next two words are frightening, his words, V'hayolecho. They will be consumed by their enemies. Terrible things will happen. Then, the Amar B'Yemahu, they will say, who is they will say? Klal Yisrael. Why did this happen to me? Because I did not feel Hashem in my midst. So he said, he called it the Ramban. The Ramban on this pasuk says that there's a thing called a Kehilas tshuva. The Ramban says it's not a complete tshuva, but let me just quote very quickly what he said. So there are three stages of tshuva. If a person says Lo chatasi, that's the worst. Says I didn't sin. That's denial. That's repudiation, and then a person has no connection to tshuva at all. But then when the person no longer says Lo chatasi, that's already something. And that's what this pasuk reflects on. So people that said, where is God? Where was God? That's okay. You're supposed to say that because that means you're searching for Hashem. And that really, I think, answers what, and he was very solicitous of survivors. He was one of those that used to say if a person has a number on his arm, just like Satmar Rebbe used to say, then you have to stand up for him, you have to ask him for a bracha. So, but he said that survivors emotionally can't deal with any answer to why this happened. So he said you just have to give them a hug and you have to explain to them that this is Yiddish Tzaris. But he did say that this was the culmination of all of the decline of those 200 years approximately until 1939 to 1945. See, it's nobody's fault in that generation. It's a cumulative effect. And in that he disagreed with a number of the Gedolim of his time that tried to pinpoint and identify a mita connected mita. He didn't agree with that at all.
So, Rabbi Feitman, I have a few questions.
Please.
You know, the Gemara says, so the Gemara says, but without that, ish becheta yumas. So isn't it in Klal Yisrael accepted, the concept of ish becheta yumas, that the cumulative averis of prior generations do not get passed down to children unless it's oichsin masi aviseyim b'yadeim, and there were 2 or 3 million frummer Jews killed who were not them. So why were they responsible for the acts of the Haskalah in Germany, or etc.?
Right. So he was very, very careful to say that when there is a Tarkucha that descends upon Klal Yisrael, so you call one Gemara, so there's another Gemara that says that when the Gemara in Bava Kama Daf Samach, going into Daf Samach. Einay Mafkin, exactly, Einay Mafkin. So this was a bechina of Einay Mafkin, and it was some of the Gedolim that were lifted before the Holocaust happened. So he said that was a phenomenon of what the Gemara says at the beginning of that is that there are tzaddikim that are spared. But after that, once it's happening, so it's Einay Mafkin Mitzadik L'Rasha, because there's something that's happening to the door. So in every door, there are good and there are bad, and the children are always innocent. So see, he was very careful to stress that you can't chas v'sholom pin any averos on anybody in the Holocaust. And on the contrary, he said that the amount of suffering that happened to any one Yid that was in Auschwitz, Belsen, Theresienstadt, or any of the other camps was way beyond even if they were a Baalei averos. So it was the totality of the Teichacha, Seliktas Yidna Teichacha. That was his term. And that Teichacha cannot be explained away by Averis, but on the other hand, it can't be ignored by the people that are a part of it. They have to just either be makabel on their shoulders, or the next door, that's our door, or the door after that, has to say, we understand that this happened as a kapara for the totality of Klal Yisrael's, I don't want to say again Averis, but Klal Yisrael's decline over these 2 centuries or so.
So, Rabbi Feitman, before the war, I think when we look at the pictures of Varsha and etc., Europe, it would seem that today the United States is, I think they say that there's 10% of Jews are Shayim B'Shabbos. I don't know if that's accurate, but something like that.
Right.
I would imagine before the war was a far greater number. And they say in Poland it was 50% from, in Hungary it was 70% from. Like certainly, maybe the Litva was less. So, did the Holocaust, if it was the descent, the decline of Klal Yisrael, I mean, it would seem that today we're in a much worse matzav than we were then. So did we clean the waters? Or do we now have Mayim Solim with a 90-10? Like, how did that help to where we ought to?
Well, listen, I have to go away from the Yeshiva for a second, even though we're quoting him. But the famous lines of Reb Meir Simcha, the Arsameach, in his Meshachach B'Chukaisei. So he's the one that said way before it happened, because Meshachach was of course published posthumously, but it was written around the year 1900, and he said Yachshav Ki Berlin Yerushalayim. So there was something in Klal Yisrael that said that they were drifting towards a tremendous decline of assimilation. So it doesn't mean that this Gary Yid, by the way, he was a Varshavah Yid. You mentioned Warsaw. He was a Varshavah Yid, and he grew up in a family of Gerach Tzitim, and he saw that greatness. So that's why he never criticized it. So Farter, he said that there was a bechina of, we're coming up on Tisha B'Av, of Asara Arugei Malchus. Nobody would ever criticize the tzaddikim of the Asara Arugei Malchus of being a part of anything bad, and yet they represented the Yidden that died, Al Kiddush Hashem, at the hands of the Romans. So the Yidden that died at the hands of the Nazis in Achshemam also represented a kapara for the rest of Klal Yisrael. They were the tzaddikim. The Oyla is an Oyla Tamima. That's really what he felt and what he stated.
So it didn't improve the situation, but it was an Oyla.
Absolutely. And he, he was actually quite upset at one of the Gedolim with whom he was close that said, well, they closed the mikvahs after the Yidden stopped keeping Taras and Mishpacha. And he called him up. He told me this himself. In fact, I heard part of the conversation. He said, who made you the Rebbeinu Shalom CPA? You did the Rebbeinu Shalom's books. How do you know that? So the Yeshiva was very careful to say that he doesn't know the Rebbeinu Shalom's books, but at the same time, there's a sense that we were in a process where Kodesh Baruch Hu pushed us towards this Haloi al Ki'ena L'kai B'Kirbi, where Hitten said, I once heard from one of his Talmidim, the Novominsker Rebbe of Gesundheit, he actually teaches Holocaust / Churban Europa in his yeshiva in Novominsk. So a Bacher asked him, so wie gewend der Rabbi Shalom in the Churban? And his answer was, to the question, where was God? So his answer was, in jede Winkel, in every corner. And he said he heard that from his mother-in-law, who was a survivor. So survivors felt the closeness to Hashem at that point. It was a little bit like the mushal, and I believe he said it, but he didn't say it in this mimer, that when of course the Gemara says that the Babylonians, the Babylonians entered into the Kodesh Kedoshim, and they saw the Kruvim of Ma'urim Zu B'Zu. So the famous kasha is, how could that be? That when the Kruvim are even facing each other, that means that we're us to return to Shlomakim. And here they're Ma'urim Zu B'Zu. So the answer is that this testified to a very high madrega simultaneous with the low madrega, because Klal Yisrael is one.
So, if we were to tell me if I'm extrapolating correctly. He said there was a slow decline of Klal Yisrael for hundreds of years because of Haskalah. And I think that I read someplace, or I heard that when they closed Volozhin, there were 5 groups in Volozhin. There were the Bundists, the Marxists, the Communists, the Balei Musa, and those who were learning. I mean, it infiltrated. That's why I saw it someplace. In other words, it infiltrated almost every part of Yiddishkeit. And post-Holocaust, it could be that it's true that we're a greater minority, the Shomer Torah mitzvahs, but on the other hand, the yeshivas we have today are stronger and greater than we've ever had in history. Is that so? In a certain way, it was like a reset and start over, and we have a thriving Yiddishkeit, both America, Yisroel, England, etc. That we've certainly the amount of Talmid Chachamim, and I mean the loss to off. We talk about off the derech. I think in Lithuania was 80%, and in Poland it was 50%. In America, it's low single digits. So was he in fact saying it was sort of like almost like a restart for Klal Yisrael?
Well, what he was saying was that, and I think everybody agrees that sometime after the Holocaust there was a tshuva movement. Some identify it with 1967 or whatever it was, but in some years there was a restart, and his understanding of that was that the Kodesh Elyon that did die, Al Kiddush Hashem, and there were so many of them, the yeshivas, the Rosh Yeshivas, the Rebbes, we say on all of them Hashem Yinkom Daman, so they gave us this kayach of the restart. Yes, absolutely. So there was a restart, but what he was saying primarily was that we have to be very careful not to identify any one, let's call it sinner, but as a dar, so the dar experienced a teichach phenomenon. And nobody today, because we're not so identified, we don't relate emotionally to the Churban Beis Hamikdash as much, although in this time of year we're supposed to, but we don't. So we're not so up in arms. Oh, how come all those thousands of Yidden got killed? And there were probably by each Churban at least 1 million Yidden that got killed, and many, if not most of them, were Kedoshim also. So that was Xeris Min HaShamayim, and this was Xeris Min HaShamayim. And he wanted us to understand the concept of Xeris Min HaShamayim in the totality of context of the Kodesh. He said, by the way, he did say that he criticized, even in the former world, the fact that we tend to only focus on the wonderful days, the Yom Tovim, and the Chanukah and Purim and the victories, and the times when I think that we were successful, and not the times of tragedy. He said tragedy, let's face it, is a part of Jewish history.
Feitman, thank you very much. It's an honor to have with us the person who actually wrote down the Shir of Rav Hutner. You said together with him for 7 years, gave us over this Messiah. It was an honor to have you. Meir Yiban HaMikdash.
Amen.
We have on the phone with us from Crown Heights, New York, Reb Simon Jacobson. He's a long-time chayzer and meniach of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He's the writer of the Sichos Kodesh of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He's the author of Towards a Meaningful Life. Welcome, Reb Simon.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here with you, Rabbi David.
So, Reb Simon, we're doing a program on the Holocaust for Tisha B'Av, and we're trying to understand how did the Gedolim of the prior generation, of this generation, how did they respond to the question that every from a Jew asks when they look at the Holocaust and they say, how could this happen to the Am HaKodesh, the Am HaNivchar? And what was the Lubavitcher Rebbe as the author of the Sichos Kodesh and the Chayzer of the Rebbe? I'm sure you're intimately familiar with his shita. What was his shita on this matter?
So, of course, the first reaction was always the Lashon HaKosov, Vayidem Aren, that when something like this happens, the first response is silence, like Shteik, Kachol Machshava. And the Rebbe many times made reference to that, both in letters and correspondence to Holocaust survivors and as well in his public talks, which I'll elaborate in a moment. But always that was that first moment of, I guess, like silent awe, as in, standing before God. Because, as I once heard an expression, one Rebbe once said to someone who had a great tragedy, he says, I don't have answers for you, but I can cry with you. I think there's always a need, and that's what with Aaron, of course, with his sons, Nadav and Avihu, there's a need to recognize that we are ultimately mortals with limited minds, and to try to go ahead and explain God and try to wrap our heads around something so tragic, innocent, 1.5 million innocent children, and we all know the scope of it would be somewhat arrogant and in a way inappropriate. So I think that's the most important thing to begin with. Beyond that, I would break it into two parts. I'm taking this, actually, I'll just even give you a citation.
So wait, Rabbi Simon, before you continue, you say it would be arrogant and inappropriate. Is that something that you've heard from the Rebbe, like similar to that?
Yes.
He basically said that it's arrogant and inappropriate to try to understand the das of Kaviyachal. That was basically, you heard those words.
Yes. Yeah. Inappropriate for sure. Arrogant, maybe he obviously didn't speak in English, so it would be more maybe chutzpahdik, or I'll tell you, in a letter that he wrote to a doctor who's a Holocaust survivor, the Rebbe once wrote, he said that we don't have an answer. Jews don't ask why. We ask, what do we have to do about it? Because if Hashem wanted us to know why, He would have told us. The fact that He didn't, and Einim Mevakesh El Lefikecho, means we only are asked to do what we have the power to do. It means that we don't need to know the answer in order to serve Hashem and do our role. Then at the end of the letter, interestingly, he writes to the doctor, he says, you may think I'm writing to you just academically and without being emotionally involved, but I too, the Rebbe writes, I too am a Holocaust survivor. I lost my brother, my grandmother, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, and other very close relatives. Just pointing that out. So I think it's the most important thing, because, when you hear people right away jump in and explain it, whether it's a punishment or it's other things, you need to have a little humility before we enter the Kodesh Kadoshim of this world that is beyond comprehension. That's why I began with that. I didn't want to just... as a matter of fact, I think I heard the name of the Friedrich Rebbe, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. There was a Rebbe came to visit him and said to him, he started explaining that the Jews did this wrong and did that wrong. So the Rebbe stopped him, the Friedrich Rebbe that is, and said, God doesn't need an advocate. He doesn't need anyone to defend him. In other words, we don't have to sit here and start explaining God and so on. So I just thought that's the most important thing to mention, because I find very often, especially in the frum world, people sometimes right away, they start explaining and they have a teretz here and they say, we have all the klolos and the teichacha, so, Jews sin, that's what happens. That's why this is a very big one. And but I wanted to say a few more points, obviously. I just wanted to begin with that. But maybe you want to lead me, or you want me to go on, whatever.
No, I came to listen.
Okay. Okay. It was, what I'm saying, I want to give a few sources in order to, if anyone wants to go check it out, the actual source. So it was a Simchas Torah Tafshin Lamed Aleph, that would be 1970. and Eli Wiesel actually was at the Farbrengen, and it was a Mitzvah. It was like that year Simchas Torah was Friday, so there was a Farbrengen that began late Shabbos afternoon and went into the night. And the Rebbe spoke at length then about the topic, and as well as some talks that he gave, Parsha Vayechi and Shmois Tofshin Nun Aleph. That would be 1991. So what I'm saying now is based on those talks, among many others, but those were very elaborate. I think they have to break this into two parts when you really start dissecting it, so to speak. The first thing is recognition, as I said, of the emotional reaction. Because at the end of the day, we all know the famous mashal or story about that big Rosh Yeshiva who lost his whole family in a major tragedy. And no one wanted to tell him the story because it was so tragic. But finally, one of his Talmidim said to Rebbe, "Tell me, my Rosh Yeshiva, Rav, tell me, how do you explain the Gemara in Brachas that Kishem Shemavarchen ala Bracha, Kach Mavarchen ala Klola? Just as you bless God for blessings, we bless God for curses." So his Rosh Yeshiva was a big Gaon, a Talmid Chacham, so he went into this whole elaboration, explaining that we don't know God's ways and everything is Gamzu L'Teva, there's a deeper story, all the different explanations you hear. Anyway, the student was adamant and said, but still, how could you compare the two? So he went into another series of explanations that based on Kabbalah and Chassidus, Yeridet Tzedek Aliyah, every descent is for a greater ascent. Okay. Finally, the student says, so are you telling me that when a person has a tragedy in their life, they have to dance as if they were dancing at their children's wedding? He says, yes, it's difficult, but yes, there's an element of a bracha in it. And so the student said, Rebbe, you can start dancing. And he told him what happened to his family. As soon as he heard what happened, he fainted. When he fainted and they finally revived him, he said, suddenly I don't understand the Gemara myself. In other words, it's one thing talking academically about these topics, another when you really take it personally. I think that I'm just elaborating why it's so vital, even from a psychological point of view. You have to respect. You go into a shiva kol, and a mother or father have lost a child, or another loss, any loss. And you start trying to explain it. It's not the derech Torah. Where do we find anyone coming to explain tragedies? Like I said, Vayidem Maran, Steak, even when there were explanations, right? Etc. So I think there's that. That's also part of Hashem's plan. He created us as emotional human beings, and it would be insensitive to try to understand everything and try to explain, especially things that are beyond our scope. On the other hand, we have the concept that the Rambam writes in Hilchos Tainis, right in the beginning. He says that the whole yesod of why we fast, all the Tainesim, is because when something happens, a tragedy, a catastrophe happens to a community or to an individual, it would be achzarius, it would be insensitive, it would be callous to just say mikra nikris, it just happened, it's a coincidence. And you have to recognize that this is it's a result of our actions, and we have to do something to correct ourselves and do tshuva. That's essentially what he writes. So based on that, one could argue, one second, if that's the case, the Holocaust is definitely in that category, it was tragedy of so many people. But here's the key difference. The Rambam doesn't say, go and point fingers at each other and say, you did an Aveda, that's why it happened to you. He's speaking to you as an individual. When you hear a tragedy happened, for you to just say, you know what, it's beyond my scope, I move on. No, something happened as Racha Pratis, you need to say, what can I do to be a better person? What do I have to do to correct my ways? What do I have to do? But to point fingers and say, others did this, where do we have that right to do that? It says in the Navi, when Yeshaya even spoke negatively about the Eden, Hashem rebuked him. It wasn't a simple matter. So it's very vital to distinguish between how you take it personally or pointing fingers and blaming others. So that's a vital point. Now, once you get into so-called the philosophical discussion, beyond the emotions, and let's say after the Vayidei Maran and there's already the silence, what can we say? Do we say anything? Moshe Rabbeinu accused Hashem, Lama Hiresa Lam Hazeh, even though it was Parei and Mitzrayim, but he pointed a finger at God, and he was taka rebuked for it. But afterwards, you see that it was left in the Torah, and in a way, Hashem afterwards, right next parasha, tells him that I will reveal to you my shame, my Shmi Havaya, to the Alvis. So you see that there's an element of discussion around this, and of course we have the whole book of Eve, where there's a whole dialogue. So I think to talk about that for a moment, which is more the philosophical side of it, besides, as you mentioned, Le Machshavei Sechem, yet there is the element of there's the mystery of it. So we don't go ahead and try to associate and say, okay, because there were sins, that's why this happened. The Rebbe made it very clear in those talks that I mentioned that, God forbid, you could say this is a punishment. He said that. Why? Because, first of all, the Achzarius was so to that extent to say, after everything that Jews went through for 2,000 years, that they still have so much sins that they would deserve such Achzarius is beyond the scope of any type of reward and punishment. You have to say it was a Gzeda that we do not understand fully. Now, when the Torah says Beferish in the Teichacha, the Torah is about to say, the Eibishter is able to say, I'm doing this to you, like it says in Chumash, because you did so and so, this is what I do to you. But for us humans to go apply that to every tragedy, that is not something appropriate to do. So at the end of the day, we say the following. We say we cannot blame anybody. We can't look at it as a punishment, but that does not mean we cannot look into our hearts and souls and see what we have to do to make a better world and be better people. And in that context, there is the lessons that we have to learn from it. Like, what would you do as a result of the Holocaust? The Rebbe writes in many places, he says, we have to do something to mamala, to fill the cholol that was left. In other words, not just leaving an empty chair by a Seder, but actually fill up that chair with another Jew. Because imagine 6 million Jews, what kind of mitzvahs they would have been doing today, and the children that they would have produced, and the grandchildren. So we have an achrayus to fill that void in every possible way, to use the so-called tragedy as a catalyst for tremendous growth in Yiddishkeit and do whatever we can. In other words, Jews do not lie down and die, God forbid. What we do is we take something, even when it's terrible, and we turn it into some form of Hazerim Bedima, Bedini Yekteru, some way of growth. And which is, you see, Taka, you see most Jews, many Jews will tell you, survivors, that the best revenge we have is the fact that we built beautiful families, and they open up a photo album, and they'll show you the pictures of their children and grandchildren. That's our revenge. Our revenge is not blowing up German cafes or becoming violent or responding tit for tat. We build, and despite everyone writing the obituary of the Jewish people, we continue to grow in the renaissance of Jewish life in many ways, in Yisroel and here, with our challenges as well. And that's ultimately the response. So in a way, it's not ignoring what happened, and it's not just dismissing and say, let's move on, but it's turning it into some type of force of growth and positivity. And one final thing I'll say, which is, we say Hashem Yinkum Domam. Why do we say that? Because if it's purely black and white reward and punishment, what's the Yinkum Domam? Because we don't want to take the Nazis and the Germans, Yimach Shemam, off the hook. They're absolutely accountable for what they did. And we don't say, oh, you know what, because the Jews were not, it was assimilation or there was other reasons, that's the reason. No. They are accountable, and whatever happens to them is their business. But I will tell you something interesting. I was in Berlin one Hanukkah, and I asked the rabbi there to take me to the Brandenburg Gate, where Yimach Shemai Hitler would stand with his hundreds of thousands of Jugendrat and his whole thing. And what was there Hanukkah? A Menahel, where he stood, the Yimach Shemai stood. A Menahel, Hanukkah Menahel. And the Christmas tree was all the way to the right. So I asked the rabbi, how'd you pull that off? So he said he convinced the curator that for the choreography, it's nicer to have the Menahel in the center. And I saw little Jewish children with tzitzis, a yarmulke, the women lighting candles. The Germans, their grandchildren, are burying themselves in shame and don't change their names, and they deny that they have any relationship to the former Nazis. And the Jews, in their own way, are building and rebuilding. So though it's not an answer, but it's the way it is an answer. It's not an answer to what happened. That we'll never wrap our heads around. But it's an answer that we have turned it into growth, and that's what we should be doing. That's in a nutshell the Nekudas Advarim. There's more to say, obviously, but well, let me stop here and let you ask me anything you'd like to ask.
No, well, the takeaway is that he held it was arrogant and chutzpahdik to try to understand the Das Elyon, and to accept the Ratzon Hashem, like to understand, like we understand so little about the world. It's astonishing. You go to the most learned doctor and they can't figure out the reason for a cold. So it's the same time to understand the Das of Kaviyachol. And you say the Rebbe's attitude is what do we take out of it so that we move forward?
Right, and grow. Yeah. I mean,
would you say, Reb Simon, that those who say it's because of Averis, Yeshaya already said, and he was punished.
Right.
Who were you to say Lashon Hara and Klal Yisrael? Would you say that to blame it on the Averis of Klal Yisrael together of to say B'teicham Tmeis V'sayim and Yeshiv?
Yes, absolutely. And I say it not only with my own Nechrayis, the Rebbe used that when he spoke about it in 1991. Yeah, it is an element. That's why we're told, because, again, you look at yourself, introspection, by all means. Dig deeper and do all the truth in the world. But once we start pointing fingers at others, what right do we have? Where were we ever given the right to do such a thing? Fine, there's the laws and halachos around how do you do that. But to go, it's frankly, I find it to be very, even on a practical level, it's distasteful when people do that. It's condescending. It's as if you're perfect and you're showing that others are not. We all have plenty of our own to correct. So yes, I totally agree that it's comparable to that. Yeah.
Well, Rabbi Jacobson, thank you very much for sharing your what you heard from the great Lubavitcher Rebbe on this. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, and we should only hear good news, and everything should be Yehofchu Yam Meil L'Sasim L'Simcha L'Moedim Tevin.
Amen. Amen. Meir Yibanah Migdash Koltov.
Amen. Thank you.
We have on the phone with us from New York City, Rebbe Elyahu Brog. He took over from his grandfather, Rabbi Avigdor Miller, his shul on very well, his well-attended shiurim and his shul. He's an old chava from the Meir Yeshiva. I believe we learned together b'chavrusa for a while. It's an honor to have you on with us, Rebbe Elyahu.
Thank you.
So, Rebbe Elyahu, there was famously a sefer came out from your grandfather, like you say, it was written in his own handwriting, called The Divine Madness, and it's about the hashkafa of the Holocaust. And we thought that Bein HaMetzarim now, it's an apt time to discuss the Holocaust. Could you give us over, what was your grandfather's hashkafa?
My grandfather, the Kohen Elzacha, he was a huge Talmid Chacham, as everybody knows. Spent his life learning, and he said when he gave his Thursday night lectures, he says, "I don't say over what I don't hear from my Rebbeim." And he said that we find in the Torah, we find in Parashat Bechukosai and in Parashat Kisavai, the Torah speaks at great length about what happens if the Klal Yisrael doesn't follow the dictates of the Torah and they try to veer away from a Kodesh Baruch Hu. And the pasuk is very graphic of what's going to happen, and the Torah says, plus there's even things that are not written in the Sefer Torah are going to happen. Some call holy the whole Makkah, that's not written in the Chumash. And the Torah says that my grandfather was very, very real. And he studied history. And he was in Europe. He himself went to Europe. He went in Lubavitcher Yeshiva. He came in 1932. And he left in 1938 when Hitler moved into the Sudetenland. And the American consul warned the citizens that it's getting a bit dangerous to stay here. They advise Americans to go back. But he was there in Europe for 6 years, and he learned the Mesiras Nefesh Mamish. That's the whole story by itself, exactly how he learned. And he said that he felt like he was going back into history, like 200 years back into colonial days. That's how primitive it was over there in Slobodka. And he hardly had what to eat, but whatever it was, he learned the Mesiras Nefesh. But he said he was there in Slobodka, and he saw that Yiddishkeit was it wasn't the way we might picture that everybody was a real Shemitah mitzvahs. That wasn't the way it was. And he said that he gave an example. For example, when he came to Slobodka, so Slobodka was on the river right across the street from Kovna. Right across the river is Kovna. So that was a big city. And he said in 1932, every half hour there were like buses or boats. I'm not sure which. There were just different two stories. One time I thought I heard he said boats. And also maybe he said buses were taking loads of Yidden to work on Shabbos. And then when he left in 1938, the boats weren't leaving every half hour. They were leaving every 5 minutes, which meant that the Chil Shabbos became so, that the breakaway from Yiddishkeit became so strong that they were able to have all these customers. And he studied history in Europe, in other countries as well. And he said, if you see the different townships, different cities, towns, they wrote histories of their towns. If you look at those books, you'll see the old generation, the grandparents had big long beards, but when you look at the new generation, it was all a generation that threw away Torah mitzvahs. They were all without yarmulkes. He said that it was a big breakaway from a Kodesh Baruch Hu, and as everyone knows, it started in Berlin. Moses Mendelssohn and the Meir already writes, and Meir, who passed away in 1926, already said that from Berlin started the Haskalah. From Berlin is going to come the Peroniyos. He writes in Taragin Kodesh. And he passed away in 1926, even before Hitler rose to power. But the grandfathers were saying that the biggest breakaway from Yiddishkeit that ever transpired in the entire history of the Jewish people was the breakaway that started about 200 years ago in Germany and Berlin, and then until the Holocaust. And he said it used to be, like back in the 1700s, there was a phrase: if your name is Mendel, you could eat from his fendel. Fendel is a Yiddish word for a pot. If his name is Mendel, you can eat from his fendel. That means you don't need the Vada Kashrut for this organization. You don't need the OU and the OK. If you go anywhere, you go to a Jewish town, you can eat by anyone's house. His name is Mendel, then the food is already kosher. That's the way it was. Everybody was fluent back in those days. But then when it came time, when World War II came around, it wasn't the case. And he said that, he quoted Rabbi Wasserman. Rabbi Wasserman said that Roi v'yalde Yisroel mischamchin b'tarbus. Most Jewish children are being trained in Tarbus. Tarbus was the largest network of schools in Europe. Like, let's say today you have Satmar in Yisroel. You have Torah, Minnesota, day schools in America. So in Europe there was something called Tarbus. And in the Tarbus, they had teachers that spoke in Ivrit, and they taught Kfira. They taught open atheism. And the Kahane writes, Roi v'yalde Yisrael mischamchin b'tarbus. And therefore Yiddishkeit was going down, not in the way, not the picture that people present us, that everybody was all tzaddikim. That wasn't the case. Grandfather said you walked in the street, and a young man in the street, they called you a parasite. There was that contempt, and a little bit of it. Maybe he said you had if you want a taste of it, it's like what with the remnants of what you have by the Tzionim, by the diehard Tzionim, the hatred that they have for the Yisroel, for the Truma. He said it was there was much more rampant. There was like a virulent anti-Semitism against the Truma, and they were throwing away Yiddishkeit. It was going to it was very very bad. See, the First and Second World War was going from extremely fast. That the rate of decline is going down. And I remember once I heard from the Meir Yeshiva, our Rebbe, Rabbi, he quoted of Chaim. Chaim was having HaKadosh to the Menahel being Mashiach already, because if you wait a little longer, you won't have whom to redeem, because everybody is going off the derech. And therefore, my grandfather therefore studied that. He came in. He was there. He was an adult. When he went to Europe, he was already 24 when he came to Europe, and when he left Europe, he was already 30 years old. He was an adult. He saw everything with a mature mind, and a yeshiva man with a mature mind. And he said he saw this is what's going on, and therefore Kodesh Baruch Hu, this is the biggest breakaway from Kodesh Baruch Hu that ever took place in the history of Klal Yisrael. Never before did such a thing ever happen. Such a tremendous amount. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu judges the world al piroi va'olam nidei nacharubai. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu foretold in the Torah that Hashem doesn't accept any compromises in the Torah. There's no Torah cannot be adulterated. It has to be straight Torah the way it was given to us in Sinai. And therefore, there's no ifs, buts, and maybes. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said that if we go off the straight and narrow, He's going to make sure that we get back onto the path. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to make a very extreme operation. He said it's like you have a forest fire, and sometimes the forest fires, he said, sometimes are beneficial, because sometimes in the forest there are diseases that are rampant in the forest, destroying trees, and it could go and no end to how the disease could travel. But when the forest fire comes, it destroys the whole forest. It's true that there are good trees, healthy trees that are destroyed also, but it destroys the entire forest, and that was all the germs, and now the forest could regrow again from scratch in a healthy, good way. And he said that Kodesh Baruch Hu made this big operation of sending Hitler, who is burning in Gehenna right now, but good. And that Rosh Hashanah, said the biggest repair the world ever saw probably was Hitler. And if he's getting it, boys, you should just listen to him, how he's screaming in Gehenna. But Kodesh Baruch Hu he decided of his own free will, he wanted to take on, he hated Eden, he wanted to kill Eden, and Hashem let him do it, sent him with this to fulfill the Torah. And therefore he said, we have to learn from the Torah, we have to learn from the Holocaust. The lesson we learn from the Holocaust is that the Torah is emes, and there's no veering away from the Torah. And there's a din and there's a dayan, and we have to follow what Hashem wants, and that's our pleasure and privilege to be able to do what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. And it's also a responsibility. And if we don't, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will make sure that we keep that responsibility. The Yiddishkeit has to go on the way it was given to us to Sinai. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu made this very big operation. Now this operation wiped out the rampant anti-Semitism that you had in Europe, was basically wiped out. Now in America, he said, you don't have it. In America, if a person is not religious, not from, he doesn't hate you for being irreligious, for being religious. It's a live and let live situation. You do what you want, I do what I want. And therefore, it's possible for Yiddishkeit to re-flourish, and it was possible now for the Baal Tshuva movement to be Makarev, the people that went off the derech. But in Europe, this is not possible. And now we see Baruch Hashem Torah flourishing in America now in a way that we haven't dreamt of before. You have a Lakewood, you have a new yeshiva, you have all the yeshivas, Kanai Nara, Chaim Blin, and all the Kehilas Meisters, and Kanai Nara, Ken Yirlu, Chaim Yigdalu, and you have the Yankov, and therefore that's something which in Europe before the war you didn't have. Now he said there were very big tzaddikim. We shouldn't take away. There were very big tzaddikim in Europe, And the tzaddikim in Europe, he said, were bigger tzaddikim than the people we have here, that we have today. He said that Erlich, a younger man today, is a setting son of the Erlich HaBalabas before the Second World War. And Erlich HaBalabas before the Second World War was a setting son of an Erlich younger man. An Erlich younger man before the Second World War was a setting son of the Erlich HaBalabas before the First World War. But he said, but these people before the Second World War, they were the minority. The yeshivas were the minority.
Rabbi Leo, your grandfather's saying, I think you said it's like sort of like a cancer. When you cut it out, you lose healthy flesh, or a forest fire clears out the old trees, but it clears out the brush. So, in effect, he felt it was a good thing for Klal Yisrael. I believe he writes that in the book. Is that correct?
Yes. He says, Yaakov says, Kol ma the Oded Rachmana L'tav Oded. The famous Gemara with Rabbi Akiva, and then the brachas. Whatever Hashem does is for good. And we know it says in the Ani Maimon, in the first of the Ani Maimon, Shabbayis Baruch Shemoy, Uvayu Mamid L'chol Abruim, Uhu Levadoi, also the Yasa L'chol HaMasim. Hashem does everything.
So that's what he writes. He writes in the book that it's a good thing, and he writes it's like a doctor. So, in effect then, was Hitler in effect like a Shliach Bezdin giving Malchus? I mean, why would we hate Hitler when in fact he was just a shliach of the Rabbeinu Shalom to clean out all the garbage and to return the yeshiva world to what it's supposed to be?
So, right, that's a question that people ask, and my grandfather answered it, and the Chofetz Chaim also answers it in the Sefer Shmiras, in the Sefer Chofetz Chaim. He says that these people, they use their free will to hurt the Eden. Not because Hashem sent them to kill Eden. These people that they were rabid anti-Semites, and they had a glee in killing Jews, and they weren't doing it because they were the Shliach Hashem. They were doing it because
Rabbi Leo, before the war, and these statistics are very vague. They say 50% of Poland was from. More than 50%, 60 or 70% of Hungary, and only 10% of Lithuania was very bad. And when your grandfather went to Lithuania, to the Litta, look, Rabbi Aaron was the only frum kid in his house. Rabbi Yankiv, I think, was one of 6 or 7. He was the only frum one in his house. On and on. The Haskalah burned through Litta like a fire. But on the other hand, when you went to Poland, it was 50-50. You went to Hungary, or Oberland, where the Sam Seifer was, it was a minority. So how does your grandfather explain, because the Jews in Litta, Haskalah burned the fire through, why would the Jews in Hungary or the Jews in Poland, where Haskalah had a much lesser impact? I mean, even in Irhani Dachas needs a Ruba to kill the rest of the city. Why are the Jews in the whole countries that weren't, why are they shuldig because of the Jews in Lithuania?
So my grandfather said that, he first recorded Mochanan. Mochanan said that Roiv Yale Yisroel Mischamchem B'Tarbus.
That he's talking about in Litta. He was talking about in Litta.
No.
And there was no Tarbus in Hungary or Oberland, but Sam Seifer was in most of where you had Alexander and Ger. They didn't have these makkis. These were very Litvish makkis. For the historical information, that probably you would have to look at my grandfather's sefer to get more historical information. Okay.
We have some backups and write-ups from what he said over there. But the truth is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did give the people in Hungary a much greater chance. If you notice, there are much more Hungarian Jews that survived the war than from Lithuania. If you notice, and if you notice, the war only in the middle of 1944 is when the major deportations began, which means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did give them, the people of Hungary, a greater chance of greater chance of survival, and gave them more chance to do tshuva. There's no question about it, as you see from when Hitler first came to them.
Yeah, but still, a million Hungarian Jews died, right? It's a lot of people.
Figure it. I don't know.
It's just a lot of people in Hungary did die. Yeah, let me ask you another question. Rebbe, let me ask you another question. the percentage today of from a Yidden is much smaller than it was before the war. Maybe 90% is not religious. There's a 60% intermarriage in America. 10% is from. So if we understand it as like a forest fire to burn out the bad, well, before the war there was a far greater percentage of Jews in the world that were Shomer Shabbos than there are today. So was the effect what we wanted? I mean, is this effect in effect what he's saying?
Rebbe had two answers on that question. He said before the war, he said that the anti-Semitic, the Truma, the Freie Eden had a hatred for the Truma. It was something that you don't have today. It was a very strong hatred that they had against the Truma. You saw the Muslim in Russia. You had the Sektsia that for example. That's a little taste of the hatred that the Freie had in if you take them in Slutsk, you saw all these different. That's why Zalman writes how he had to run out of the window when they tried with the people there. They tried to kill him, jump out of the window. And the Freie had a hatred for the Frumos. In America, you don't have, and therefore that's one difference. He said. Another difference he said is that now in America there's something called the Maltshuva movement, with people, the Kiruv movement that was working on bringing people back, which in Europe you didn't have. In Europe you didn't have that. And those were two factors that I recall that he mentioned. I think he mentioned maybe another one also. And he said also there was another story also. He said because when people came to America, he said they came into a melting pot. They came into a tzviva that was a very foreign tzviva, and it was very difficult to be frum. Keep Shabbos when he came to America 100 something years ago. It was very different. The Sonia was very big, and therefore it was different than in Europe. In Europe, you had shtetl, you had towns, cities, and they were able to keep Shabbos, and yet they threw it away. But here in America, to keep Shabbos was very difficult. So therefore, those are three reasons why America is different than in Europe.
Let me ask you one more question, Rebbe Elyahu. We had on a Talmid from Rav Hutner, and your grandfather, he was a mashkiach, I believe, for many years in Chaim Berlin, but he was an Adam who had his own hashkafa. He was a Talmid of the great yeshivas in Europe. But him and Rav Hutner differed very much in one nekuda. Rav Hutner felt that we couldn't point and say it's because of Averis. He felt, look, the Teichacha came back to Klal Yisrael, it's part of the history, but he said we can't say it's because of any particular Aveira or anything. And your grandfather was much more strong about saying, they baked on Shabbos, they cooked on Shabbos, they traveled. They say the Chafetz Chaim. I heard this over from Rav Kalmanovich when I was in the Meir. He said that his father was on a train with the Chafetz Chaim, and somebody came in. No, they were in Vilna together, and on Shabbos, somebody came into the Groz Klois, which was where the Gra had learned, selling fresh challah on Shabbos day. And the Chafetz Chaim was incredibly upset about it. And that night he took a train, and Rav Kalmanovich was on the train with him. And he said, he looked at him in the middle of the night. He saw that he couldn't sleep. They were in a sleep compartment, I guess. And he said the Chafetz Chaim was restless, and he stood up. So he told him, he said, "Rake the Rav, zint on the lectra." This is how I remember the story. Turn on the electricity, he did. And Chafetz Chaim said, "Is that my hand?" He looked at his hand. He says, "The way I see my hand now, like that's how I see that they're going to burn Jews alive in the Vilna Klois. Wie ich seh mein Hand, zeh as they wollen verbrennen Jiden in Vilna Klois." That's what he told them. That's what I remember. I heard it directly. So he was much more comfortable saying that the Churban happened because of particular Averis. Could you try to explain, like maybe what the difference was on a Lumdisha level between Rav Hutner and Yezeder? Rav Hutner said, we're not allowed to say you have to be a Navi. Yeshaya Navi even said, Am Tmeis Vasayim, he was Nenashvert. You have to be a Navi. And yet we see that others said, no, it was directly because of an Avera. Could you try to explain what this chiluk is, this machlokes is in Hashkafa?
Yeah, I'm not really so familiar with Rav Hutner's Mahalach. I never heard it from him, so I'm not really clear about it. But my grandfather's Mahalach wasn't necessarily for a specific Aveira. He said the whole Yiddishkeit, the entire Yiddishkeit was thrown away. It wasn't a specific Aveira. It was the entire Yiddishkeit. People threw away the whole entire Torah. They became apikurim. It wasn't a specific Aveira for this or that. And therefore, when we see that such a tremendous, such Hashem knows the idea of Talmid knows how to measure what's called a Raiv, and when you look at the new generation in all those books, you see the new generation. We're not through them. They threw away the Torah. It's not a question of because they didn't keep Shatnez, they didn't keep this mitzvah, they didn't keep that mitzvah. It's the entire Torah is being thrown away, and that never happened before in Klal Yisrael. That so many people should throw away the entire Torah like it happened in the last Korban.
Rabbi Brog, it's a great honor to have you on with us. Thank you very much for your time.
David, thank you. Hatzlacha Rabba.
Kol tov hagoter. Bye-bye. We have on the line with us from Williamsburg, Rav Moshe Aryeh Kahane. He's a Talmid of Satmar. He learned in Satmar. He also learned by Reb Shaul Brus, and by Reb Mordechai Beck. Welcome, Rav Kahane.
Hello, how are you? Shalom Aleichem.
Shalom Aleichem. So, Rav Kahane, it's Bein HaMitzarim, and it's a time of, Yefashfish B'maisav. It's a time of looking back at, time of introspection, right? Igrid Ve'ilula Tamya, Igrid Ve'ivla Tamya. And we have had on many speakers who we asked, how do you look at the Holocaust, and how do we say, Mali Atzara Zais to, Am HaNivcher. We've had many different, and I know that the Divrei Yoel had a very strong opinion about this, and rather than trying to get a Litvak who learned in, all the famous Litvish yeshivas to give, I thought, let's go to the source and see if a Talmid could try to be masbet to the Olam, the Divrei Yoel's sheet in this.
Okay, sure. I'll try my best. So, first of all, talking about the Holocaust, which is obviously a very sensitive issue, so when we try to explain and try to be masber, what caused the Holocaust, things like that, one has to be very careful not to dilute the responsibility of the Holocaust from the people who actually did the Holocaust, which is Nazi Germany and their and all the helpers throughout Europe, and they are forever the Ratchem Yimach Shemoy Imam, and the same thing that we see in Chazal with Titus Rusha. Yeah, Titus is the Rusha. He destroyed the Beis Hamikdash, and he's the Rusha. But we still see in Chazal that they're trying to make sense, so to speak, what was the cause, or maybe not even the cause. What sin did we do that
the Torah wasn't able to be Megan on us?
Yeah, let's put it this way, right? So
what allowed us to be vulnerable? What Aveira allowed us to be vulnerable so that the Mazik could come in and do what he had to do? Right,
yeah, very well. And when we say things, it's not that we are, we say that when Chazal said that he did a virus or whatever. It's not that we did more a virus than the Imusu Oilam. It's not that we are worse. It's just that Hashem Yisborach expects from us more. Plus the Kim Am Yisroel is Shaloi B'derech HaTeva, which I think this is obviously everyone agrees to that the Kim Am Yisroel is Shloi B'derech HaTeva against the odds. So since it's Shloi B'derech HaTeva, we are getting judged in Shloi B'derech HaTeva on a Shloi B'derech HaTeva basis. So even though the Imusu Oilam, are even with all our sins, the Imus Oilam are not better than us, and they sometimes, a lot of times, they don't get punished that we got punished, throughout the ages. It's because our existence is a shleike derech Davidic existence, so we are getting judged differently. So that, with that perspective, one can try to explain the causes of the Holocaust. So obviously, Satmar Rebbe is very clear about that in the Moshe, that fact is that Klal Yisrael never had such a harm in our history like the Holocaust, both in quantity, which is 6 million Jews, which is 10 times more than Chorban Better, which is 600,000 Jews got killed. The Chorban Better, which is considered, the Chazal said, it's even more. In a sense, it was even more a Chorban than Chorban Beis Hamikdash, based on the people that got killed. So first of all, there's 6 million Jews. Number one. Number two is the depth of the rishus, which is I don't want to go into all the graphic details, but it's known to everybody. Plus the concept that the Jews got were a target based on a race, which is all the past wars and harm that the Jews had throughout the ages, and Haneis was basically a war between Rome conquered the world, so they tried to conquer Yerushalayim and Yisroel, and later with the Inquisition and the ancient Christians and the Muslims was a religious war, which some can understand in a sense, but a Holocaust based on a race, that people of a certain DNA must be eliminated, is unheard of in human history. So this is obviously the biggest harm. And then we see in the Gemara and Kesibas, we see that Chazal uses language, certain languages, but the Shulish Shviyas that they don't use anywhere else, which is animater atzmechem animater that if Jews will try to be matcher a cats, or go to Eretz Yisrael with force, there's a big oynish for it. So obviously it's Satmar Rebbe understood that it's very obvious that the biggest harm and the biggest oynish, the biggest harm, the biggest Holocaust by Klal Yisrael, and then we see the biggest oynish in the Gemara. If Jews try to be matcher as a cats, so very clearly there's a connection. This is not a coincidence. So this was plus he also had issue with on a practical level. He had issue how the some Jewish leaders at the time handled the Nazi Germany, but this is more a political debate. If some say there was no other option, the Nazi Germany will not like other anti-Semites where you can try to bargain or deal with them, But so this was basically Satmar Rebbe shit.
He held it was because we were over on the Gimel Shavuos by being doicha the Kates with Zionism.
Right.
So I want to ask you a few things. Maybe you could, there are many Achronim, the Avnei Nezer, the Sameach, etc. Tzviher Kalish, etc., who believe that the Gimel Shavuos were not relevant. Avnei Nezer said it's a Agadah to Gemara. The Yar Sameach said it was because the Balfour Declaration made it that it wasn't the Alu B'chaima, because it was with the Haskama of the Umas Olam There were many different things. So if somebody does something, I'll give you an example. I don't carry inside an Erev, certainly not in Borough Park, Flatbush, Manhattan. And Moshe, I hold Chiyuv Skila, right? Now, if somebody carries in the Erev, I'm going to take that person as an aid Kiddushin. He's being Saimach. He has his Rav who he's Saimach on. So even if the Satmar Rebbe is right that the Gimel Shavuos is a terrible thing, Yani Mater Atzmachem, Kayoli Asada, whatever, but if there were certainly Gedolim who were Mater it, so how do we have such a terrible Holocaust? He says, look, I was Saimach on the Ar Sameach's Psak, I was Saimach on the Avnei Nezer's Psak, I was Saimach on, how would he explain that?
Okay, first of all, I didn't. I was not aware of their Samach about the Belfer Declaration and the Avnei, but the answer to the
basically, our Samach says, he says, after the Balfour Declaration was signed, he says, Baruch Hashem, that it was removed from us, the Chaymer, the fear of the Pachad Gimel Shavuos, because now it's no more Al Yalla B'Chayma, it's Baskama. So he writes that in a letter. And I could show you all the Marmakas, whatever. Take my word that there was certainly Gedolim who held Al-Pi Allah that it's Mutta. The son held because Rav Tzirish Kalish, I think, said because the Gimel Shavuos is on condition that they treat you well once they'll Mavatal one Shavuah, because it says one was Al Timur Dubumas, but the other one of the Shavuos was is that there won't be Meshabed Klal Yisrael Yosemidai. He said once they were over on this, and but whatever the case is, I don't know why those who are matir, let's say the Erev, whatever the reason may be, we're still meshadach with them. You know what I mean? You say, okay, you have your Rav. Why would that be different?
Okay, so assuming that there's Samach Haneis said that the Shulshvi is not a problem, it's not that this. There was two diets, like for Erev, for example, right, where there's a Machlek Paskam. Then you're 100% right. That the person that the Gemara says, "B'mekomish the blazer, Carson, Atman getin that."
Eitzim lamila, yeah.
Eitzim lamila b'Shabbos, because he said that you're allowed to, and the people who lived there were actually were probably obligated to follow the blazer. But this is different because let's understand one more something more than that. What's the greatest problem with the Shul Shvius, right? Why is this so problematic? Because this is a Satmar Rebbe gehalten. Now this is part from the 12th Anamam in Bais HaMashiach. The traditional view by Klal Yisrael, all in alle Deures, okay, is given. Was that we're going back to Yisroel and Einer mit Mashiach, not before that. This was the traditional view of everybody. This was the way of thinking of everybody. Okay, so in the Shul Shvius is just enforcing that view. So it's not the Shul Shvius per se, as Satmar Rebbe says. The Shul Shvius gives it more choimer by making it a shvia. But the concept of Shul Shvius and was part from the 12th Animam that Mashiach and Kibbutz Gulias and Mashiach belong together. So since this was the traditional view, and even though, let's say, the Heiliger Samach, came up with the Balfour Declaration or the Avnei said about Agarata, which is very interesting because the Shul Shvius is mentioned in a lot of Surim throughout the ages. The Maral, in all the generations, there were or even Koirach. Koirach is considered a holy man. Okay, even after he with Moshe Rabbeinu, even the Aryeh Kodesh says that he will be the Kohen Gadol.
Only by Chassidim or by Mekubalim. In the world, he's considered a kaif. The Maral says he was kaifa b'Teiras Moshe. It's the Lashon of Maral, and that's why his kapara is to scream Moshe emes v'Teiras emes. He was a kaifer and the animamin of Teiras Moshe. This states in Maral, and he brings many chazals that way, etc.
Okay.
I know there's a famous. The Chayzi used to say the Heilig is the Kairach, but this is chidushim. It's certainly not the Pashiv Shat, right?
Yeah.
Makom is Madalahem beGehenim, right? Pischei shel Gehenim. It says he went to Gehenim, right? So
Yeah, but it's from the Aryeh Kodesh. Okay, so let's not talk about Kodesh. Let's not talk about the Yeshiva. But the point is, in Klal Yisrael there was always all the times confusions. You know how you should judge.
I just want to point out that Sameach was considered, at least in Lithuania, the Goyin Hagadol B'Dairei, right? And Avnei Nezer was certainly Bismane considered the Paisik of Poland, right? The Holocaust. I mean, these are real giants. We're not talking about a Rav someplace in a klein shtetl. You know what I mean? The Sameach till today is considered the Chacham, the Goyin Hagadol B'Dairei in from that period. You know what I mean? They said Chaim Brisker wanted to get Askama from him. I mean, he was. Avnei Nezer certainly, I don't remember the whole name. I once had a list of like 15 Rabbanim who supported this opinion. You're not talking about some minority opinion. Whatever.
Yeah.
Let me ask you another question. How did he understand the Divrei Yael? That if the purpose of the Holocaust, the way he understands it, was because of the Gimel Shvuas and to eradicate Zionism, and it was a Yad Hashem to, sort of. Isn't it very strange that after the Holocaust, the outcome was the state of Israel, and the flourishing state of Israel is the outcome of the effort to eradicate Zionism by the Holocaust? It sounds like it sounds like the Yad Hashem certainly didn't work over here.
Okay, first of all, he mentioned that a couple of times that things can go on against Hashem for hundreds of years. I mean, we had the Zud and other things. So this is not a proof of anything. But there is more to that. There's more to that too. But this was definitely not Satmar Rebbe shit. But I read somewhere. I think it was a Machine Shel Yisroel, a cipher about Satmar Rebbe. That someone said, but again, this is definitely not a Satmar Rebbe shitta, and I need to look up the source and who said it, and I don't know, and I don't want this should be taken the wrong way. The Gidus Yisroel, the third Knesset of Gidus Yisroel, which was like Tat Tzadik Zoin, I think, or Tat Tzadik Guf, they accepted a state, a Jewish state based on halacha. Okay. The accepted based on halacha, and someone mentioned the Gimel Shvi there, and someone answered again. I need to see who that was. That with all the excuses for the Shul Shvius that some might have, the Chazal that that there's the oynish of the Chikis Akatz, this wird nicht brutal, no matter what.
Well. That our Sameach's point was is after the Balfour Declaration, it was bottled. That's what he says. He says now it's not al timridu, but it's with their approval. That was his very point.
Yeah, but again, the Holocaust proved that Sameach was wrong. If the Sameach said it, the Holocaust proved that Sameach was wrong. But because there is a coincidence here.
I think on the contrary, I think our Sameach very possibly would say is you should have gone up to Eretz Yisrael and you wouldn't have been killed in the Holocaust.
Should have gone up to Yisroel, it wouldn't be killed in the Holocaust.
All those who went were saved.
It was saved, but most of those who went off the derech. There's no Shemesh Shabbos children of the majority of those 70-80% who went.
The majority of those who went were not from to begin with. But,
no,
we don't
I know.
We don't know who stayed from. We know whoever went stayed alive. So there's just no way to know either way. I'm saying there's no.
I had a great uncle who went to Yisroel, and the tzaddiks because of the Nazi Germany and everything, and he came back because he couldn't live with what he saw there. So so he was a frum guy, and
There's no doubt, and the same thing with America. I mean, there were many people who came to America. The majority in the beginning also became free. Let me ask you another question. Why would Hitler, the most anti-Jewish, the most anti-Zionist country of all the areas that were in Europe, was Lithuania, Poland was less. I mean, Hungary was sort of 30%, 20%, but the most anti-Zionist was Germany, because most Germans were Reform at that point, and they weren't religious, and they had no interest in Zionism. This is a historical fact. So the question is, isn't it strange that Hitler, who's coming because of Zionism, would come from a country that was the most anti-Zionist, where the Jews were?
Okay. First of all, Hitler was born in Austria, the same place where Herzl, I think, was born. Austria, Hungary. I think Herzl lived in Hungary, but I'm not sure if Herzl was born in Hungary and Austria, but he lived in Austria. So you can make the argument that Hitler and Herzl both came from the same place, and they were maybe even neighbors. I don't know. That's number one. But the truth is, the Holocaust. There's another thing with the Holocaust, as Rebbe Wasserman said. Rebbe Wasserman said the Holocaust is a result of Zionism, and also because of communism. Jews were involved in communism, and by communism he meant the atheist communism, the anti-religious part of communism. So he said National Socialism, which is Nazis. National Socialism is a combination of nationalism and socialism. So an answer to your question, Germany was also the main force of anti-religious people. I mean, this was the place of the Reformed Judaism was born.
Yeah, so I'm just saying. My only point was that they were also anti-Zionist.
Yeah, that's true.
Jews in Germany were anti-Zionist.
Yeah.
It's ironic that he would rise to power there. Let me ask you one last thing, and this is something Rav Hutner said, as well as the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe said this in his Shabbat. He said, "How could I try to give a reason for the Holocaust?" He said, even a Navi, when a Navi tried to say, Yeshayahu said, "But I'm tmeis fasayim and Yeshevis, or Yeshev," to give sort of to find a reason for the time of Klal Yisrael, he was nenash. He said, where does anybody have the right to look at Klal Yisrael and to say, these are your chatoim and this is why something happened? He said, he wasn't speaking about anybody in particular. He said that's never happened in our history. How would you respond to that?
This is actually what I began with. That we don't want to give reasons. I don't like to use the word reasons for that reason, because this is something we can't understand. This is only for Hashem. We can't understand. Let's not try to understand the Holocaust. This is what I began with. So let's not try to understand the Holocaust. But based on what we see in Chazal and later, that every time when we had some kind of a Tzura, you see in the Tzuram and in Chazal trying to make sense based on political concepts. So it's not strange. It's not it's actually part of the way we look at things. Mark Twain said it. Everyone. I mean, the second president John Adams wrote it in a letter that we are here against the odds. So we are here somehow look at Derech Hateva, but Derech Nes. Okay. So if you go, if you want to, if it's B'derech Nes, then you're being judged differently than other people. So in other words, you can say about the Holocaust, if the Jews were trying to settle ourselves based on natural army, natural how to survive. So God said, okay, you want to be natural? The natural thing is that Jews as a minority and as a successful minority and as a actually a very successful minority, and Jews are everywhere. So you can argue that that Jews survive during the years is an S. So if you want to do it naturally, let's see what happens naturally.
Well, Rabbi Kahane, thank you very much for your time. It's always an honor to speak to you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
We have on the phone with us from Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Moshe Taragin. He's a musmach of Rabbi Yashiber Soloveitchik He learned for many years by Rabbi Lichtenstein. He's Rosh Yeshiva in Gush, and he is well versed in what is sort of Rabbi Yoshe Ber's hashkafa about the Holocaust. Welcome, Rav Taragin.
Thank you, Shalom Aleichem. Thank you for welcoming me. We should have an easy week in Tzil and Mishpati Padna.
Amen. So, Rav Taragin, could you give over to us as a Talmid of Rabbi Yoshe Ber, what was his hashkafa as per the Holocaust? How could this happen to Klal Yisrael? What are we to take from it? In a time of introspection, which we're talking about the Yomim before Tisha B'Av, the 9 days. What was his? It's an appropriate time to speak about this.
I don't want my comments to be misconstrued as reflective of Rebbe Soloveitchik. I was in his share at a very later stage of his career and his life. I certainly was very influenced by him in his Talmidim, so these are my own views. I was more of a Talmid of Rebbe Lichtenstein and Rav Amital, and I'm assuming there's a lot of coherence between the views. I think, first of all, there's this recognition that anti-Semitism and sinna for Yidden is not something random in history. It's not something that just happens to crop up because Jews behave in a certain way, but it's built into history because we're the Am Hashem, because Rebbeinu Shalom has expectations of us to stand for his presence in this world and to bring Kodesh into this world. And we challenge the world, and the world doesn't like to be challenged. And even though if you interviewed your average Roman or your average Spanish Inquisitor or your average Ukrainian SS guard, they couldn't articulate, because you're the Am Hashem, that's why we hate you. But it's something subconscious, and it's, we believe in what we call metaphysics, that there are forces that we can't put our finger on that are much deeper, that shape our experiences. Where in Shabbos says, Loma Nikush Mahar Sinai, of all the names, which is the name to stick? It's the name of Har Sinai. Yad Sin Olam. And in a certain view, we look at the Holocaust as part of that history. And we look back on Tisha B'Av at all the events that happened, and to a degree, it's a continuation of that process. And now that Baruch Hashem Am Yisrael is on the rise, we have a vantage point that we can appreciate all the ways that we're most nefesh al Kodesh Hashem to bring Hashem's presence into this world. And Baruch Hashem, Hashem's presence is felt far more palpably than at any point in today's Mikdash, in our world of Torah, in our world of Jewish Renaissance. On the other hand, many believe, and I think many people in my community believe, that it wasn't just part of the continuation of pogroms. There's a very interesting piece in the Eish Kodesh. I think it was in 1940 he gave a Shir Parshas Vayeshev around Hanukkah, and he made the first point, that why are people complaining about all the Nazi oppression, we've faced worse in the past, and to be a Yid is to be Ger Yezeh Achad Eretz Lahem. A year later, he adds a footnote. It's written in the Eish Kodesh. He says, what I said last year I take back, or I reverse, because after living through 1940 and 1941 in the ghetto, in the Warsaw Ghetto, and he saw how hateful and how persecuting, and he just said this is a shift in history, and this is not just like Zeres Tachbatad or the Inquisition or the Sarah Malchus. This is something that we have to look at with a fresh set of eyes and offer a perspective, and I'm very proud and thankful that you're working so hard at Tisha B'Av to try to make sense of this. So it's really a duality, whether we look at it as part of Yad Sin Olam or it's really a shift in history, and I think we feel a little bit of each.
And a shift in history in what way?
There's a sense that towards the end of Gullus, whatever that means, and that can mean hundreds of years, but towards the final chapters of Gullus, there's a sense that things become a lot more bleaker and a lot more intense. Based on the pasuk in Shir Hashirim, Kihine Astav Over Hageshem Chalav Halachlo. The Chazal darshan that there are two parts to Gullus. There's the overall period of Stav, of winter, and then there's the very, very intense and acute suffering of Geshem. So, for example, in Mitzrayim, we were there for 210 years, but only the last 86 years was the Shibud, from when Miriam was born. And there's a sense that at the end of Gullus, however you define that, it doesn't mean that the Gullus is over tomorrow, but right before Mizos HaNishkafa Kemo Shachar, right before the Chama and the Levana come up, there's a certain darkness that we feel. So we're hoping, again, we have to be very, very careful. We don't want to see ourselves as Yodei Das Elyon, Chas v'Shalom. And if one thing the Holocaust teaches us, and this is important to remember, is humility before the Rebbeinu Shalom, and not to be overconfident, to assume that we can know every move of the Rebbeinu Shalom. But there's a sense that something is happening in our world, and we have to respond to that and be aware of that.
So, to the person the family that perished in the Holocaust, the 1.5 million children, why did they die? I mean, what is just articulate it. If you had to put according to your hashkafa here that you're saying over, what would the reason be?
I don't think anyone to ask that question or to answer that question is to both be insolent to Kodesh Baruch Hu and to have, I think, moral insensitivity. When you're dealing with something at such a large scale, we just walk away with kashas. I mean, life is, if anything, Tisha B'Av reminds us that Bad Yeshev, Ulai Yesh Tikva, right? Person sits in the corner, Ulai Yesh Tikva. Maybe, we don't even know. When Rebbe read this pasuk in Meir, Rebbe started bawling. Because the Lashon of Eicha is Ulai Yeshev Badat V'Yidam Ulai Yesh Tikva. Maybe this Tikva, what does that even mean? We have Avtacha from Kodesh Baruch Hu that of course we have a Tikva. But we live in a world in which our trajectories and our timelines are very different from the Rebbe Shalom. And of course we have Avtacha, we have to rely on, but to try to either make predictions and have overconfidence about how history is unfolding, or to try to apply simple solutions as if, they died on behalf of the famous story of Rebbe Hanan, who was taken out of the attic. He was learning Sichos and he was taken in, and he saw that there was really no chance to escape, and he gave that very famous shmooze that who knows if these korbanos that we're offering now, for these korbanos of the Kedusha of the Torah, who knows what type of Zichuyos we'll have around this warn them against Machshavas people. And we would hope that all those korbanos are Zichuyos and Shemayim for how Am Yisrael is evolving, Baruch Hashem, so capably. But to make a one-to-one association that this family or these people died so that there should be more Torah in our world and more Kedusha, these are equations that are in Kilo Machshivosai Machshivosechem V'lo Darchechem Derachai. These are Kodesh Baruch Hu's equations, and we dare not enter that calculus.
So when you say the hashkafa from Rav Amital, you say that, or from Rabbi Aaron or from Yeshiva, you say, I'm just trying to synopsize. You're saying it wasn't just part of the Halach Yelech. You say over from the Eish Kodesh, this is a change. This is worse than whatever happened before. So as a Maimon, how are we supposed to understand that? Why did something worse than ever happened before happen to us? And is the only answer that we're saying is, look, we don't know. Like, what was there hashkafa? We don't know. Like, give me some more.
But I think Rav Amital, and I heard this from others, to offer simple solutions philosophically, hashkafically, it's impossible. And everyone lives with kashas, and this teaches us to live with kashas. I think what he spoke about more is how do we act after the Holocaust? What's our responsibility after the Holocaust? So, in some ways, Rav Amital, again, I was very influenced. He was a Holocaust. He went through the Holocaust in ways that Rav Lichtenstein and Rav Yeshiva did not. So a lot of my hashkafa about the Holocaust was imprinted and influenced by his discussions about real life experiences. He told us what it was like in concentration camps, what it was like davening in cellars and ghettos. He talked about how after Am Yisrael has proven its commitment to Kodesh Baruch Hu, there's a Chavos Halavavo says that the central midah of the Emunah is Hakaras Hatov. You should be thankful to Kodesh Baruch Hu. He felt in the post-Holocaust world to build the Avodas Hashem around that midah, when we have so many kashas and so much frustration, so much tragedy, and so much crying during Yizkor, it's just inauthentic. You can tell yourself, but as a human being, it's hard to live with a world of such grotesque death and nightmarish. So he talked about a pasuk in Eov tells HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hen yiftaleni lo yachel. You can kill me, but I'll still wait for you. There's a type of a love and a type of an ahava that surpasses expectations and that isn't conditional upon reciprocity and what. And Am Yisrael almost has proven itself that we love HaKadosh Baruch Hu so deeply that Hen yiftaleni lo yachel. We don't have an answer to this, and we were murdered and we suffered. It doesn't make a difference. Our love for you is so deep and has been proven at this point in history. It's almost as if the Holocaust was in Yisrael for Am Yisrael. And Am Yisrael escaped and Baruch Hashem survived it with a heightened level of emunah. And because of that, a heightened level of expectation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We've proven ourselves to you and we're able to be maminim even after something of this nature. And that has strengthened and consolidated our relationship. Hello?
Yes.
Hello?
Yeah. I'm sorry, Rabbi Taragin.
And somehow a lot of us feel, especially those who feel that there's some religious meaning in living in Eretz Yisrael and rebuilding our people in general, we feel that this is a Kiddush Hashem, and the ability to take Chil Hashem and Kiddush Hashem from a small equation, how you're going to act when you go to the baseball game, you're going to throw popcorn on your neighbor or act quietly, to a larger question of a living, what happens now in Yisrael reflects HaKadosh Baruch Hu. At the third Kehilas of the Aguda in 1936, Rabbi Menachem Zemba was asked to speak, and he was also perished in the Holocaust, in the Warsaw Ghetto. And he basically outlined the two different Sichos about Eretz Yisrael, those who were supporting the return to Eretz Yisrael and those who were not supporting it as a Yad Hashem. And he basically said, a very interesting piece, it's written up in the Chidushim, says each person feels that this is a question of Kiddush Hashem. Those who feel that we should focus on Talmid Torah and I'll be Mekadosh Shem Shemayim, and those who feel that restoring broader organic nation of Eretz Yisrael and Am Yisrael is also. And that was written before the Shoah. In the heels of the Shoah, in the wake of the Holocaust, we feel the dramatic shift in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence between 1945 and the world we inhabit also helps us gain perspective on what happened.
When you say it helps you gain perspective, are you saying that part of the reason for the Holocaust is maybe that Kal Yisrael should be returned back to Eretz Yisrael, or this is just a Kiddush Hashem that was Rabbeinu Shalom after the Chil Hashem of the Hastaras Panim of the Holocaust? This was a Kiddush Hashem was needed sort of to counteract the great Chil Hashem.
Absolutely the second. Qualitatively, unconditionally the second, and in no way the first. But it's the ability to. I grew up in Brooklyn, so for me, the whole world of Kiddush Hashem and Chil Hashem was, as I said before, in a very narrow space. How they're going looking at me in a museum or in a public area. But the ability to live your life through the narrative of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Kiddush and Chil Hashem. What's the presence? A member of Amital, on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, his shmooze before Musaf would be, we used to joke about it amongst the Talmid, it would be the State of the Union address. Basically, what is the state of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Malchus in this world? Because it's a day of Malchus. The second day he would speak about HaKadosh Yitzchak. The first day, has it been a good year or a bad year for Malchus? So, for example, in 1991, when communism fell, being that this was a culture that was predicated upon the denial of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, its demise was an uptick, an augmentation of Malchus Hashem. So we're having this conversation now in ways that was hard to have in 1945. Islamic fundamentalist terror. It's an attack on the Rebbe Shalom. They're hijacking the face of Kodesh Kodesh Baruch Hu is Salach Rachamim v'Chesed v'Chayim. It's a Rambam writes in Achos Shabbos. Chesed v'Rachamim v'Chayim v'Shalom ba'olam. That's why you Machal Shabbos v'Chayim v'Hem. And they're painting Rebbe Shalom doesn't exist. That he's angry when he's happy when people die, and he's bloodthirsty, and he's essentially they're kofar, because when you deny the Darchei Hashem, even though you're suggesting that you speak in the name of God, you're describing a dibuk that doesn't exist. So the sense that we have to be the proxies or the agents of Dvar Hashem in this world, I think was brought into sharper relief by the events of the last century. So I don't think we're asking philosophically why it happened. That's already very, very dangerous ground to be on, to justify the ways of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to human beings. But in response, and that's really how you didn't behave. We don't ask, Eov, the entire book of Eov is trying to, Megillah Siv is trying to understand why things happen. And all of his friends come and visit him and give this sheet or that sheet to make sense of the problem of evil in the world. And Megillah Saruf is very, very parallel to Megillah Eov. Very parallel. There must be 10 or 15 parallels. And people suffer, and Naomi suffers the same way Eov does. But no one asks why. It's not a philosophy convention. It's how can we change the world? How can we do acts of chesed? I'm Rav Zeira, Sefer Zayin Balatum of Lotar, famous matter, Shel Olam Chesed Yibana, for people to be able to rebuild a shattered world based on Ratzon Hashem and acts of chesed.
Rabbi Taragin, what would you say to the following thought? The Arachayim HaKadosh, and it's based on the Zohar HaKadosh, says that by Yosef HaTzadik, it says, V'aboy reik ein bei mayim. So Rashi says, Mayim ein bei, avol nechashim v'akravim yesh bei. So Arachayim says, they asked, Ma betza ki nareg es achinu, right? What's the benefit of killing him? So what do? They throw him into a place that's full of vipers and scorpions. So the Arachayim asks, what was the benefit of it? So the Arachayim says, the Shvatim's cheshbon was, He says, if any person, because of Bechira, has the right to kill anybody else, a tzaddik gomer could be narrowed by a rasha. That's what Bechira says. In other words, if a tzaddik gomer was walking across the street and a rasha came running at him with a knife and he tried to stab him and the knife bounced off magnetically, there would be no more Bechira. He says that's the koyach ha-Bechira. But animals, however, nature, that is not. They have no Bechira. So he says if the Nachashim and Akravim kill him, then we know he's really a rasha. And if they don't, then we know he's not royal lamisa. But the fact that a human could kill him proves nothing. Any human could kill any other human. That is Bechira. And so my question to you is, why doesn't anybody say that Bechira allows real evil to grow in this world? In fact, Zelu Mazeh, as much good as is Ezra. And so therefore we ask, how could a Holocaust happen? Well, once the Rebbeinu Shalom Kaviyachal opened up Pandora's box by releasing Bechira, then anything can happen. And why do we see it as a shaila when we already have Rishonim, Achreinim, and Zohar Kodesh that say this explicitly?
Look, it's a very, very valid point. And it's the cornerstone of our Emunah. In fact, in Eicha, the three psukim the Rambam quotes. These are the three psukim that the Rambam quotes. This is probably the greatest synopsis of Bechira Chavshis in the entire. So to a degree, our response to evil and tragedy is exactly as you said. Well, that's the ticket of admission, so to speak, into the world of Bechira Chavshis. So it's just the L'chalavim, as the Rambam writes. So it's certainly correct. On the same token, from Desvegen, we believe that, as you said, a Rosh Gamor can walk down to the avenue and stab a Tzaddik Gamor. But there are some larger trajectories in history that HaKadosh Baruch Hu still maintains. Right? You wouldn't assume, for example, that Bechira Chavshis would allow someone to eternally and perpetually forestall Bias HaMashiach. Right? That's determinist. The Rebbe Shalom has set in stone. And whatever evil and whatever arcs people cook up that could, in theory, in a mathematical world of vectors and possibilities, blunt it and prevent it, it's simply not on the table. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be Nichnas V'Olam and will reshape Ratzon Adam and reshape Masi Adam. So we still believe that there are some general, as the Rambam writes, in Nechos Kiddush HaChodesh, that if there would be a time in history in which there wouldn't be Yidden living in Eretz Yisrael, and millions of Yidden living in Eretz Yisrael, then our entire system of Yom Tovim would collapse, because in his mind, the Kiddush HaChodesh never ended. When the Ruach was fed, it was based on the Samchos of the Am Yisrael living in Eretz Yisrael. So there are, as we would call, nuclear options, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu just won't allow. And if he does allow them, it's because he has a reason, not because people chose them on their own initiative. So if HaKadosh Baruch Hu destroys the Beis HaMikdash, it's not simply because Nebuchadnezzar was an up-and-coming superstar who was able to marshal all that. In fact, we say in Eicha, Yitzhak Alaros, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu empowers Nebuchadnezzar, and he's just a pawn. And whoever attacks the Jewish people ultimately, we don't fight in a lightweight division. That's what we say. We fight in a heavyweight division. And all of our enemies ultimately are the heavyweights of history, based on the Maharal, because we have to repair whatever chesronos they bring to history. So it's Nebuchadnezzar, it's Yavan, it's Paris and Madai. We're not being afflicted by people in Iceland. It's Spain and Soviet Union and Nazi Germany and Islamic fundamentalism. It's always at the center point of history. So that's why I think, although your answer is the cornerstone of what happens, is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu cannot allow certain events to occur. Something of this magnitude, not without a reason, of course, not based on simple Bechira Chavshis. Something of this magnitude would fall into that category. So that's why people have kashas. How could HaKadosh Baruch Hu allow something like this to lie? You can't just say that Hitler chose it. National.
Well, Rabbi Taragin, thank you very much for your time, and it was an honor to have you on with us.
Thank you, and hopefully this should be the last year. We should throw out the Kehilas. You should throw out the tapes for the Tisha B'Av recording.
Okay, thank you.
Call to all of Am Yisrael. Bye-bye.
Mrs. Epstein?
Yes.
Hi, this is David Lichtenstein. How are you?
Thank you.
So, we're doing a show on the Holocaust.
Yes.
And we wanted to talk to a survivor who actually had been through it.
Yes, I understand.
So, can you tell us your story?
Well, my maiden name is Sanger. I'm from Frankfurt, Germany. My name is Ruth Epstein, Naysanger, and I was in Germany during the Kristallnacht, which was a very traumatic experience because we lived right across the street from a Beis Medrash, and early in the morning they started throwing out the Sifrei Torah and put a match to it. We were standing behind the curtain right across the street, and we took Kriya, and then they marched us to the police station, and we stayed there the whole day. The uncertainty has been already felt quite a bit before, but everybody thought it'll pass. Unfortunately, as we know, it did not pass, and we paid a big price for it. My parents sent me on a kindertransport the end of the year. This happened November 10th and December 6th. We were 6 siblings. One of them is one of the 6 million, and the other we all got out in different parts. However, the family at that time was split up and never returned to its original component the way it was.
What did your father do in Frankfurt?
My father was a Moches Forim. He had a Forum store with all the Tashmisha Kodesh, and he had his Rebbe come to his store every day to learn. He was not interrupted. He's from Bavaria, from a small town, Woodenwiesen, and he had worked for my grandfather, and then he married my mother from the store and took it over. He never went to Yeshiva, but our home was a very different type of home. It wasn't typical, I don't know if you know Yekkisch or call it German, because my father used to bring home travelers who needed a place. It was more of an open home where the rigidity of Germany was a bit was not felt there. Anyway, I was sent to France, and when the war broke out in France, my family I was with, they went to Vichy. They had Hitler then came. I was not in a concentration camp, but I was in a non-Jewish atmosphere. After I left the family, they put me into an orphanage and signed papers. I could go on a kindertransport, the second one, to America. Reaching America, I was put again in another orphanage, which was not kosher. It was Jewish, but not kosher. And since I was religious, they had no place where to put me. I was sent to another orphanage in California, which was, again, it was Jewish by name, but nothing felt. I was in California for 4 years and lived in a family which had a non-Jewish housekeeper. So, of course, the food and all that I was not able to eat, except I, Baruch Hashem, survived on fruits and vegetables.
Let me ask you, what happened to your siblings and your parents? What happened to the family?
2 of my brothers were sent to Switzerland, Umsprache. And one was my younger brother, and one was one older brother. My sister was sent to England. My brother, who had been sent to England first, was able to secure papers. So what I say, Hashem always sends the refuah before the makkah. He was able to get my parents out and my uncle. And my father, Olvis Sholem, unfortunately did not survive and passed away the first year. I was away from home, so I never saw my father again. My Jewish education stopped at age 12, and I never had any other education in Yiddishkeit until many years later when I came to Baltimore. This is all. My whole life is one story of Hashkocha Protis. I always say, if we don't leave Hashem, He does not leave us. He is watching over us, but we have to connect to Him.
Epstein, how would you, when you meet survivors who are less fortunate, and they, we've spoken to somebody who's 1 of 10, the only one who survived, and it's very common, how do you explain to them like, the Holocaust. How could the Rebbeinu Shalom allow such a terrible thing to happen to the Jewish people? How do you respond to them? I'm sure you can ask this question.
I personally don't think it's Hashem. It's our actions. If we I just wrote about that. I write every week a letter of the Torah, send it to quite a few people. I just wrote that Hashem is there for us to do good. He wouldn't do anything that's not good. The problem is, every generation we've had misfortunes. We come to a new land, we stay there, we become some wealthy, some not, but it's a refuge. And then we build up. When we get all comfortable and set, a little goes away on one side, a little on the other side, not by everybody, of course, but Hashem wants us to learn we should connect to Him and not to the surrounding around us. Whatever is out, we have to have. Why? This is my question.
Yeah, but Ruth,
2
to 3 million Fruma Jews were killed in the Holocaust.
You're right.
All of Radomsk, Belz, Sanz, Ger, all of Alexander, hundreds of thousands were wiped out. There were many of them, Yereim, Shleimim. How do you explain to somebody who went through that? I can understand if somebody you feel had, a lot of Averis or something, maybe their actions brought it.
It's not necessarily their Averis. They may be paying the price for generations before them that have not kept the way Hashem would like to see us keeping Torah and mitzvahs. And I'm not a judge, and there's only one supreme judge. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu only gives us, nisyonos, along the road of life in order to turn to Him and not to look outside of our own beautiful Messiah of our Torah. We should connect to Hashem and not to the people living around us. Like I say, Yisroel is compared to a yono. And if you know, you spell yono, Yud, Vav, Nun, yono, Yud, Vav, Nun, Hey. The hay, the Yevonim wanted to take away the hay, the Torah from us. All the other nations have always tried to destroy us, either physically or spiritually. And if you take away the hay from the Yoina, what remains? Yavon. They wanted to be like we. Come to us, be like us. But we have the strength of character to be able to go against the stream and keep Hashem's mitzvahs and Torah, no matter where you are. And the Holocaust, I'm not a judge. I'm not trying to justify anyone. But I tell you one thing that I felt being a teacher, the survivors, many of them of the Holocaust, who built new lives, could not give their neshama to their children because they were so burned out. But they were striving to make money in order to compensate with money, with gifts, with whatever you want. And I never accepted that because I said, this is just what HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't want. This is a lesson we should have learned. I know it was a dear lesson to pay. I know I was only 13 when I left home, never saw my family until age 19. And during those years, I was in a midbar shimomo, without Yiddishkeit, without anything. But because of the strong foundation I had at home, I think I survived, because when I came to America, especially California, Hollywood, I couldn't find anyone to keep Shalom mitzvahs like I was used to. But I was trying, and I did the best I could. And Baruch Hashem, Hashem was with me, and I stayed wholesome, I hope, in the respect when Hashem looks at me and judges me. But I can't judge anybody else. I only say it's not the people of the Holocaust necessarily who were punished for maybe what happened in generations before. I don't know. But I look at it very differently, and I have a very different outlook in life. And what have we supposed to learn? Compassion for one another, helping one another, and not look in it, what's in it for me? What can I get out of it? But what can I give? Hashem is a giver. We should be givers. We should emulate Hashem's ways in order that Hashem should accept us as His Am Yisroel. And that's what we're waiting for now, for Mashiach. But everybody has it on their lips. Many, many people are crying for it. Many people are just saying, yeah, Mashiach comes, I'll come to Eretz Yisrael. My husband, Olav Sholem, was in concentration camp for 6 years under the Russians, and his father died there, his grandmother died there. His father said on his deathbed to my mother-in-law, send Moshe, my husband, to Yeshiva and go to Eretz Yisrael. And Baruch Hashem, we both were circle to this, what his father had wanted. We had many, many nisyonos along the way. One of them, my husband and I, we built our lives together on nothing, but we had everything because we had each other. If you would realize, after the chasana, we had $56 between us, but we were happy. Today you can give a castle and all the money. Money doesn't bring happiness. I find, on the contrary, too much money may sour happiness. And Baruch Hashem, we built a life, and we established a school for the deaf, and we've been always involved in works where nobody else seems to have taken the reins. And Baruch Hashem, I can say it has paid off Kerfel Keflayim, because we had a son who was deaf, and there was no Jewish school for him. So my husband and I founded one in America and one in Eretz Yisrael. And I say, if we didn't do anything else but just give the school so our son should stay on the right track, it was worth it. Because his family he built is, I have no thanks. I thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu every moment for the goodness, even though I know I was deprived in many ways, but the lesson of life I have learned is Hashem gave us a Torah, which is a Kli Chemdo, which is supposed to be the most important part of our lives. And unfortunately, we always look today around where, what can we do better, what can we have better, why? Why not look inside yourselves? We are born with such a great treasure in us, our neshama. Why not keep our neshama pure and work to elevate our neshama instead of dragging it down to the mundane things of today's life and existence? I don't relate to that. My husband always used to say, dead fish go with the stream, live fish go against stream. So don't be a dead fish. In other words, what he went through is quite a different story. I won't even go into that. It would take me too long. But all I can do is I thank the HaKadosh Baruch Hu for having tested me and having been able to raise a wholesome family that I can put my head down in any one of my children's homes and not worry about kashrus or anything else. This, I think, is the greatest reward one can get. The money in the bank we don't take with us. And doing chesed and being compassionate to others, this is what's going to get an entrance ticket. This is what we can fill our suitcases with, rather than money, which today is one of the great nisyonis, and many people succumb to it. Another thing I think is very much lacking now is a personal relationship. We used to sit around the table doing homework. Everything was together in the family. Today the families are split up because each one has to have or needs or wants these little gadgets, which is our destruction. Don't use it. Turn back. Use what Hashem gave us, your seichel, to be an Oved Hashem, an Eved Hashem, and do what is right. This is my way of looking at life.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Epstein. That was very, very passionate and wise, and we thank you very much for your thoughts. And this is the answers to last week's halacha riddle.
Hi, I wanted to comment on the riddle about the Gureshes Lumafreya situation. I think that when the get is chal after 30 days, when he makes the Tanai and the long arm of the Tanai goes back in time and activates the get Lumafreya, then she's Mugureshes Lumafreya. But we don't rewrite history Lumafreya. In other words, to say that, since she's Mugureshes Lumafreya, therefore the neder comes back to life now because the hafara of the Baal did is no good, that far you don't go. Because the Tanai is just on the Maisa that it's attached to. And the Gerushin is attached to the Tanai of Shloshim Yom, so Shloshim Yom, the Gerushin gets activated on Mafreya. But to say now she's the Mugareshes on Mafreya, and therefore the Afar is no good, and now you want to resuscitate the Neder in real time was dead. The Baal was Meir, he was the Baal at that time. And it can't be resuscitated through a Tanai, the Mafreya, because that's not how Mafreya works. I believe Rav Shimon says this somewhere in the Shari Yosher.